Welcome to another episode of the Robinson Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what does it mean to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So this is going to be a completely different approach to the podcast moving forward. I set up a goal for myself. I wrote out a list of all the different topics that I wanted to cover when it came to futuristic thinking and kind of laying the foundation of every topic I could think of that interested me and that I felt like I could kind of give my 2 cents on. And I achieved that goal. I did 25 episodes, deep diving into different ideas of futurism and different topics for someone to kind of stumble into and kind of figure out the clues that I left, the little breadcrumbs of clues that I left within those episodes. And I wanted to build up this sort of memory bank of different ideas and topics. And yeah, and so all of those were quite structured, and I put a lot of time and effort and research into each of those episodes and reading off a script as well, which is helpful, so helpful when you're trying to build something into a system. And now it's time to take the training wheels off and allow myself to speak freely on a topic and do the more fun exploratory side of things without having to make sure I hit the right notes that I wanted to hit. So yeah, I'm very excited for this next chapter, this next era of the podcast. And it is what I always intentioned, what my intention for this podcast always was. So I'm very excited to kind of rip the Band-Aid off for myself and just let myself think freely, which is really cool. And so welcome to episode 1 of season 2. And we always know, okay, so this is the thing as well. Everyone always knows that season 1 is always kind of you're getting to know the characters, you're getting to know the layouts, you're getting into the rhythm and the flow, and you're laying the foundations for everything else. Season 2 is when things get really good and really juicy, and you can explore the side characters. You can go on a few more side quests. Everyone knows who they are. They know the rhythm. And I feel like that's very much season 2. And we're really leaning into what I do best, which is asking deeper questions and just letting my mind wander. I have to, again, though, I have to keep myself on track with this because I'm known to go off on a side quest. In real life as well, I will do this. I have wanted to do this podcast since 2020. It was summer 2022, and I attempted it in the summer of 2023, and I just got sidetracked. I got sidetracked, and I let people get in my head that it wasn't a good idea to kind of do this. And I think it was because it was in their best it was probably in their best interest, but it's also kind of weird to put yourself out there as well. People don't people don't like change. People don't like that. But anyways, so that also goes into this whole concept of time versus timing. And this is truly what I want to get into. But at the top of this episode, this whole thing actually starts for me personally, February of 2011, week 1. It was week 1 of university. So February 2011, I order a book off Amazon called Some by David Engelman. And if you have been following my little evolutions online, you know that I've mentioned this book several times. I have a line tattooed on me from one of the short stories called Perpetuity. And basically the premise of this short story is this idea that God, I may have lost some people even just by saying that anyways, but this idea that God only rewards sinners with an afterlife. And it's because the whole story then goes into the perspective of God himself. And they talk about this idea of, God created man in his image, but also his social situation as well. And so God is in the pursuit of happiness, right? He does all these things to try and find out how to, consume his own being and his own life. And he looks at what he's created and he's like, I gave you everything, and you haven't enjoyed the fruits of life and humanity. And so I'm going to make you suffer with me for immortality. That's your punishment, is to suffer for the rest of your life with a good life. And I just think that premise was so interesting. And the line within the story was time drowns him. And immediately, as soon as I read that, I underlined it. This was the beginning of me underlining things in books. when I read that line as well, I just knew I had to have that tattooed on me. I didn't know why. I knew exactly, I could see it so vividly. And it took me 10 years. It took me 10 years, exactly the same date, 10 years later. So in 2021, I got it tattooed on my arm. And I just thought it was so funny of like, you could see something so clearly and know it was going to happen, but it took me 10 years. And when I finally got it tattooed on me, the whole point of that line and what it meant to me completely changed because I had gone through life. I was 17 when I first read the story. I hadn't lived life yet. I was still like this private schoolgirl going to university. And, you know, to me, the world wasn't big yet, but it was the beginning stages of me realizing how big the world was through studying humanities. And then 10 years later, I had lived a life. I had, almost died a million times. And, I've gone through some horrific things throughout those 10 years and some great things too. And, carried on my pursuit of knowledge as well. And I was about to move to Auckland. I had this dream of moving as well and starting a whole new life for myself. And I finally got it because I had this breakup and I had this freedom from that breakup to be able to pursue something that I really just knew in my soul that I wanted to experience. And yeah, and so I finally got it tattooed on me. And it was one of those, oh, this has like a whole new meaning to me now. It's, this concept of time, how I knew it was going to happen at some point in my life. But if I had like known at 17 the exact date that I would have finally got it tattooed on me, I don't think I would have appreciated that. And I think I would have just been like, oh. But the whole point of this meaning for me now is that it tells a story. And this is where I'm getting to with this whole episode of like, what does time mean to us? Like, and I just think there's, wow, there's, when you think about that in itself, I think there's different ideas of when it comes to time. And I think when it comes to this intersection of technology, I think it tells a really cool story. So if we would think about time, right, we have our human experience of time that we've all agreed to, which is, we have the set date, we have these years, we have a calendar. And I'm also, this is coming from a very Eurocentric Western perspective. So please keep that in mind. I don't know, I can't speak on other cultures or other perspectives of time. So this is all coming from a very Eurocentric perspective. But yeah, we have this agreed concept of time. And this has been around for a very long time, this thing of like this is the year, this is the month, this is the hour, you know what I mean? And so that's our human constructed idea of time. But we also have that personal experience of time as well, how we physically experience it ourselves. So what does 5 minutes feel like to you? And that can change, right? Our perspective, if we're doing something that we're so fully immersed in, time seems to fly by. But if we're doing something that we don't like, time seems to stretch out and it takes a long time, right? So that's the other concept of time. And then there's like this third one that doesn't quite fit into a human constructed concept. It doesn't fit into a physical experience of time, but it's something else and it's very universal. And it's this idea of I think it's more of like this quantum perspective of time, where it's not quite like you have to think about this from a very interstellar space where he enters into that, like, right at the end of Interstellar, where he enters that space and he's pushing the books through time, literally forcing things to give clues to his daughter, right? That's where this new concept of time comes from. And as a futurist, this is what I am so deeply passionate about. It's those moments of deja vu. It's those moments of this is what is happening here sort of moments of time where you kind of seem to pierce through the veil almost. And, we can almost make time malleable. And it really deconstructs our sort of perception of what we think is linear and then also our human experience of it as well. So that's kind of what I want to get into throughout this whole episode is kind of looking at that from all these different perspectives. But I really want to look at this from a very technological perspective as well. And the technologies that we're building today and in the past, how have they all kind of helped us as humans create this new narrative of what time is? So that's what we're going to get into today. Yeah, so the underlying question under all of this is like, how do we actually spend our time if it is underneath all of these new ideas of what time is? So let's get into it. So before clocks and our human understanding of time, we looked towards nature through and cycles. And we did that through things like looking at the seasons changing to help us guide us through different timings. And, we responded to the natural world to help us sort of navigate our daily lives, right? We looked towards the natural world. And then we also looked at things like how the moon is changing. And we started looking at a little bit more granular concept of time through hours and minutes through looking at shadows from the sun and bring to light what time it is, right? As we, started creating these constructs of time in terms of seasons of life and how, every year we have 4 seasons within a year, we then created months to help understand how, everything moved within the sky as well and breaking all of those down into really nicely, tightly packed sort of packages for us. Because of technology, we actually had to come to consensus about what time actually was in terms of hours and minutes. So we couldn't just rely on it, for some people it would have been, 12:02. For some people it would have been 12:10, right? We had to come to consensus because of trains, which I find so fascinating. To get us from A to B, we had to come to consensus about when a train would arrive at the station and when it would depart from the station so that everyone who lived in different areas could actually agree and keep a schedule, right? We couldn't just be like, oh, yeah, we'll turn up when it turns up. No, we had to keep track of, the timing of something, which was, I just find so beautifully fascinating that technology kind of opened that door for us to all being like, oh, we need to actually, this needs to be something, this is important to us. We need to know where we're going at what time so that we can all depart together. And I just think, and arrive together at the same time as well. This intangible thing we had to come to consensus to, an agreement to, like all the different train stations, to be like, this is going to be the set time. If you don't agree with this time, then you'll miss the train. And I just find that so fascinating. Um, that we went from this natural thing of, living within the environment and understanding our concept of time through the stars and through seasons changing and listening to the natural world, and then having to come to agreement to be like, actually, we need this to make sense to all of us, right? And then with that, we came with a synchronized world. And then Apple came along and kind of made that even more granular to the second, right? And now everyone follows, I'm pretty sure everyone follows an Apple time. Yeah. And so I think that progression of time is quite an interesting thing when you actually think about it in terms of like setting it up and making it very concrete. And I think that's really important to think about when it comes to your own concept of time of like it is broken up. Like there are different experiences to what time is. But when I was like coming up with this concept for today's podcast episode, I was actually thinking about this concept of like technology making and like, technology actually helping us get a little bit more granular with what time is. And I just started thinking about what is the most granular time we could actually get to. And I Googled it, and apparently we have actually the shortest amount of time, I have to read this, sorry. The shortest amount of time that we have actually captured and been able to comprehend is 247 zeptoseconds. So scientists were able to measure this by looking at taking a photograph of or taking images of a photon. So that is the speed of light moving through a hydrogen molecule. How crazy is that? And so the measurement that they got of that movement was 247 zeptoseconds. And so a zeptosecond is a trillionth of a billionth of a second. Like that is insane. And so, but they have intentions of actually seeing how shorter this measurement could become, which is crazy. And if you think about, so as a futurist and as someone who knows how time works in terms of like every decision you make opens up a new timeline and a new potential, like that terrifies me. That actually terrifies me to be like, oh my God, every granular decision that you make can actually open up new potentials. That can get really overwhelming. And I just thought like this technology is opening up new forms of time that us humans don't even have any perception of, and we can't actually experience it because it is too fast for the human mind to actually comprehend. And I just think about this thing of like, what happens when technology does actually measure things that we can't perceive? If we're creating these technologies that break down this like granular concept of what we understand as this natural world, this human world, and things like that, technologies that operate within speeds and scales, just these like intervals of things that we can't perceive as humans. It really does push on this like human feeling of like, oh, that's unknown. That breaks my comprehension of what I know and what feels safe in terms of human understanding. And it pulls me into this idea of when electricity was first sort of brought into the everyday masses, right? People were terrified of electricity. People were terrified of having lights in their home because they thought that they would be electrocuted. And I'm having that same sort of visceral reaction to that sort of, granular understandings of time and how, because it really does press on this human construct and this human definitions that we have. And for me personally, I don't know if this will be the same for others, but it presses on this thing of, oh my God, then every decision that I make is truly important. It does two things for me actually. It's making time feel totally irrelevant and that we have so much time to do all the things that we want to do. But it's also pressing on this other part of me that feels very like, oh my God, there's too many decisions to make. There's too much, like, how do you keep on track? How do you make sure that you're so fully the person that you want to be? If all these decisions, these micro moments, how do you always make sure that you're making the right decisions, right? Oh my God. So being increasingly like around these technologies that are breaking our definitions of what time is and what, our experience of time in this linear fashion, I think it does open up more quantum thinkings about time. And going back to Interstellar, that idea of how can we pierce through the veil almost? And is that possible? Is that possible to actually go back or go forward or move sideways, perhaps? It really does open up this thing of it. What if it's not as linear as we think? And I think that's something worth sitting on. I don't want to explore that today because I don't want to blow my own brain, but like I think that is a really interesting concept of like, even because even as a futurist, I always think about time almost like a spider's web. But this kind of makes it a little bit more like four-dimensional. And that is insane to think about that we're at that period of time where, is it linear? How quantum do we get? And how does our technology, how is it breaking our concepts of time? So where could this all take us? I feel like that's the really interesting question to ask. And I think it's moving into this more idea of like building your own relationship with time and understanding your perspective of time, I think is really important as well. And I don't think measuring time is important, but I think measuring and understanding your own patterns is what's important and how you experience time. How do you want to experience your time? And again, if you have followed the work that we do for the curious resources and have like listened along, you know that I love pattern recognition, but understanding your own patterning and being able to pick up on how things kind of repeat is a different form of an experience of time as well. So we know that nature follows a pattern. We follow the cycles of life we go through. We follow summer to autumn to winter to spring, and then it repeats again. Humans are very similar to that if you actually start to understand your own patterning of your own life as well. If you go back through your life, you can probably pick up a pattern that is very similar to that. And if you think about the Fibonacci sequence as well, you know that, nature as well follows this very similar spiral-like perspective. The Fibonacci sequence is actually quite a fascinating topic. I don't have time to dive into that today, and I don't think I want to either. It's a little bit too much, but it does follow this idea of emergence and how when things are emerging, they do follow the sequence. And so if things do have this patterning to them and things have a cycle, what does that mean with our human understanding of what time is? We've created 247 zeptoseconds for ourselves. But does that fit into this natural world understanding of time and how things actually naturally evolve and naturally emerge? So I think it's almost the same thing, but in a different font. We are trying to get granular about this linear concept of time. But I think when we get this linear concept of time is actually making us see things from a new, grander quantum perspective where we actually just notice this pattern. I don't want to dive too deep into this because it can get a little bit like insane, but I do think that that's a really interesting perspective as well. Once you start noticing your own sort of patterning, it can open up about timings and how things tend to repeat at certain times and in sequence with each other. I think, again, that goes back to this idea of like, interstellar, this piercing through of like, what if like certain things keep happening to keep you to notice what is happening as well, right? Like looking at the books that are falling, looking at the specific things that are happening and being like, is there something that I am noticing within this moment? And like, why is that happening? And just allowing that sort of perspective to help guide you in these moments. Those are like little breadcrumbs, I like to think of them. And so understanding all of that and understanding this idea of emergence and how things follow a pattern, you start to learn that it isn't necessarily about the time itself, but more so about timing. And I think this is also a really interesting idea of if you were to look back in your life, again, thinking about my tattoo, if I were to have gotten it earlier, I don't think I would have appreciated it. It had to be at the right time because of the timing of my life, not necessarily because it was 10 years or anything, but it was because of all the built up experiences that it meant so much more to me. And I think that's what's important. It's not about the time, it's about the timing. And so with that, I actually want to bring up one concept from a film that I deeply, deeply, deeply love. It has honestly like left such an impression on me over the years. And I always forget about it. And then it kind of, again, reemerges right when I need it. And it's this 2009 sci-fi romance called Timer. It's a little bit low budget. It's a little bit weird. The storyline's a bit iffy, but the overall concept is so beautiful. And it's just stayed with me since it came out. And so the premise of this whole film is that most people have this device that is imprinted on their wrist and it counts down to the day that you'll meet your soulmate. And the whole premise of this film is like this underlying question. So like the lead character, she's had this timer blank forever because her person hasn't actually had the device, like hasn't had the device imprinted on him yet. And so it counts down when you both have the timers on you. I think as a young teenager, I loved the concept of that, of like, oh, it takes the guessing work out of it. Oh, you just like know when to meet your person. That's fantastic. Like, great. And then as I've grown older and I've, had relationships and I've had breakups and, had my try on boyfriends, I kind of come back to this idea of like, I wouldn't actually want to know. I think it would ruin. And could you imagine if you knew the exact date as well? Like the movie asks this question of like, if you could know the exact moment you would meet your person, would you want to know? And if you did know, what would you do about it? The movie does ask you to explore different consequences of this. If technology could tell you exactly what was going to happen in your life, what are the impacts of that? You would probably stop exploring life and falling into things and stumbling into new paths, new potentials, taking side quests. You might actually start waiting as well, thinking, well, where are you? The timer told me you would be like, what, 3-4 months, and where are you? And then all your whole life would be consumed by one moment rather than experiencing all the little moments that got you to that point. And I think it would also reduce your life to a countdown where you were constantly expecting something. And then on the other side of that, what if you didn't know? You could be living your life, exploring the world, trying new people on, living different types of fantasies out in your life. And you could also take the side quest, what if you opened the other door of your life? What would happen then? You could take the detours, you could make mistakes, you could get your heart broken and, take missteps. You could live your life rather than waiting for one specific moment. And I think once upon a time I would have loved to have known all of these details. But if you had something tell you, it would ruin the magic. So why would you want to know? I don't know. I just think that concept was so interesting. And so this is actually quite funny because a couple of years ago, again, we're going back to this whole thing of things will repeat. Things will always come back around. It's not about the time, it's about the timing. So again, going back to this concept of me wanting to start this damn podcast. So when I was actually like my last public speech when I was quitting my old life, I had this whole speech prepared about looking at technology and AI and, how do you predict things? Like, where are we going? How can we use technology as, these insights? And I actually wrote this entire speech about consciousness and artificial intelligence and, my concerns and, whatever was going to happen with artificial intelligence when it came to consciousness. And this idea that was taken from Harari of this idea of, of people uploading their consciousness to the cloud to like live forever. But for me, my perspective on that was a little bit different. And I wrote this whole speech and presentation about being able to download consciousness from the cloud instead of being able to like gain insights and gain access to like guidance from your own self and your higher self rather than being able to upload consciousness and live forever, right? I feel like that's quite a masculine thing of like, I need to live forever. How do I fertile the lands to like stay, like leave an impression on something? And for me, I think I have such a different perspective of like, I just want to get through the next day. I just want to know that I'm doing a good job. I just want to know that I'm living the best life I can live. And I think that's a very opposite perspective. Anyway, so that's my perspective on what I thought artificial intelligence could lead us to. And this idea of generative AI, more so if you could figure out, and I know how to figure it out, I'm not going to put it up online because like obviously, but this idea of, helping it guide you in certain ways and how it can help you learn your own intuition and your own guidance and and that's the whole thing of that episode on the art of perception. That's what that was leaning towards, and the whole Think Like a Futurist series as well. If you would like to look at that, you can learn how to do futuristic thinking for yourself. But again, it's this idea of how do you have guidance that you can trust? And to me, that was like what I wanted to talk about. And this idea of this very fine line of having something tell you explicitly and being able to, and as someone who can predict the future and has used to do it unethically as well. Oh my God. This thing of like, what are the ethics with that? Of technology telling you certain things versus guiding us in the right direction. And I think that's where I fall ethically as a futurist. There are ethics around that. And I think my concern with, these types of technologies that are coming out that can tell us things, that I do think they're great synthesizers. I think there is room for these technologies for us to help guide humanity in the right direction. But I also think that it needs to almost have this train station effect of like, if we want to get to like the next train station at the same time, we have to come to consensus, right? And I think that that's such a beautiful sort of analogy when we think about it from this perspective of technology intercepting the next wave of how we perceive time, how do we experience our own lives? How do we get into this, how do we live a good life? How do we pursue our own happiness and our own exploration of the world? So I wanted to talk about that. And I remember standing at the podium, being prepared to speak, and people in the audience, the reason why I left the industry, were like just not being nice. And I just thought, this isn't for you. This is not the right time. I need to heal from all of this. I need to be around new energy, new things. And when the timing is right for me to say these things, the timing will be correct. Right now isn't the time. And I just find that so fascinating. Again, it's like if I had given that speech back then to that audience, I wouldn't have said the things that I just said of ethics. But now I have gone on this whole life journey and I have learned so much more about myself. I've, done my whole founder's journey. I've done my whole, diving into different ideas of time and timing and meeting new people and all of these things. And I finally have come to this point of like, realizing, oh, okay, it's all about the timing, not the time. It's almost that thing of, I wouldn't have understood the ethics. I would have just been someone that would have been so happy to be like how I was, saying things without understanding the full consequences of time. With technology as well, we're at such a delicate place in society, and technology could take us down a track where what I see isn't great. Or we could take the longer route and really, really think about things from multiple perspectives and think about the real true impacts. And also at the same time, learn that there is no right or wrong. I think that's a really important thing. And And so all of these things together, it is about the timing, not the time. And so I go back to the movie Timer and I think about that of, what if you spent all of this time knowing about this countdown of meeting somebody or having this experience that you so desperately want, but it takes the joy out of it. I just think it's such a fascinating, if you are interested in thinking about like, what would you do in that situation? I highly recommend the movie. It is very good to think about things from a different perspective of like, would you want to know? Would you want to know? And so that's the thing of like, you don't have to like totally change your life tomorrow. You don't have to like quantum leap. You don't have to go to Interstellar to like leave yourself clues for like your child to like get in the right direction. You don't have to do any of that. I think it is just about agency and being like, what is the vision of your own life that you want to live? Yeah, making those decisions that align to that. And I think as well, when it comes to technology, I think it is just, dip your toe into things. There's nothing wrong with that. But how do we make sure that we build technology that doesn't take away from the human condition and our own experience of time, and instead of prescribing to us, that confines us more into set rules that aren't actually what we want to experience within the world. So with all of this little understanding that we've done today, I think the really important thing to remember isn't how fast do we get to the future. I think the more interesting question for us to think about is when we are moving through this time and space, how do we actually want to experience each moment? What do we do with the time in between? So the thing is, you can't force everything into existence. You can have a vision, you can have a dream, you can want to build things. But from my experience, the end goal, the end state isn't what is important. It's the journey. It's the bumping into things. It's the learning. It's the exploring. It's the making mistakes. It's figuring it out as you go, but also creating something from all of those experiences. So again, it's not how fast we can get there. It's how can we learn to move when we want to move? How can we learn what feels good for us in each moment? When to wait, when to execute on something. And I think the idea of like, if you feel like you've missed your own train in life, there is another one that will be heading right around the corner for you. That's the thing, right? We built train schedules for that reason, to know when to pack your bags, when to arrive at the station, and when to hop on board. And if you miss that train, there'll be another one in 20 minutes. So if you feel like you've missed out on something, I don't think you have. I think you just need to wait around, go to a cafe, go read a book, go explore where you are right now, because another one will arrive in about 20 minutes. And I think that's the thing to remember of this concept of linear time. It's not really real anymore if you really think about it. And that's why it's important to keep the vision and kind of build up that vision in your mind, because that's the anchor that will keep you going, especially when things feel like they are taking their time. But remember, it's this idea of this flow state, right? You do the things that feel really fun, that speed up time for you, things that make you learn, that make you look outside of the box. That's what's important when you're waiting around for the future to arrive. But don't spend your time staring at the clock, hoping. If you think about that, if you spend your time staring at the clock, wanting it to speed up, then you're staring at something that has 247 zeptoseconds. I can't even comprehend that. So again, it's not about the time itself, it is about the timing. So if our shortest period of time that we can experience and capture is 247 zeptoseconds, that's an extraordinary amount of micro decisions and micro moments that we need to be experiencing every day. So perhaps it is not worth worrying about time at all. Instead, perhaps hold on to the vision of the life that you want to live and bump into it. Bump into the experiences that will lead you to that vision later on the track. Doing the things that feel expansive, doing the things that feel fun, being able to tell a better story once you arrive at the destination itself. So my final question for today to leave you with is this. If you stopped asking whether you're running out of time and started asking whether you're on the right timing, what would you do differently? And so the sun is setting in my own little world at the moment. And so I take that as a cue to end today's little podcast episode. If today's episode got you thinking, come and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our insights and inspirations for founders and future-facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. But if you want to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and future systems thinking to help transform, evolve, and build the next era. But if you're still orienting, we have so many free resources available on our website to help help you with your own founder's journey. But if you're ready to take the leap, you can also check out our services as well. Make sure to subscribe so that you can help build a better future for everybody. Everything is in the notes below, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.